Welcome everyone to our series, Lean Into Your Faith, Meeting Professional Challenges with Spiritual Resources. So this is a series that features the wisdom of professional women who have achieved a high level of leadership and have led from the foundation of their faith. So these women, they hail from many different sectors, disciplines, and faith backgrounds, and along the way have encountered some different challenges, yet ultimately have triumphed over them. So they come to our series to share their experience along with some helpful tools which other fellow women of faith can utilize in their effort to build confidence, live out their faith, and pursue their personal and professional passions for global change. So a little bit about the format of our webinar today. It's an open chat format, so we encourage you to engage in the chat box below to introduce yourself, share your own wisdom, ask any questions. Our speaker will provide approximately 20 minutes of presentation, at which time she'll open up for a time of Q&A and address any questions in the chat box. So our featured speaker today is Palwasha Kakar. And she'll be sharing with us some of her wisdom on her presentation, It Takes a Village, Fostering Support from Your Faith Community. And the kind of the vision behind this presentation was really how do we foster resiliency and support from our faith brothers and sisters in both our personal challenges and professional challenges in life in general. So she's going to be sharing some of her wisdom along those lines. Just a little bit of an introduction about Palwasha. Palwasha is a dear friend who serves on our Center for Women, Faith, and Leadership Advisory Council. In addition to serving on the council, she also serves as the Senior Program Officer for Religion and Peace Building at the United States Institute of Peace. She joined USIP after 4 years with the Asia Foundation, where she was the Afghanistan Director for Women's Empowerment and Development. So prior to joining the foundation, Palwasha led the Gender Mainstreaming and Civil Society Unit in the United Nations Development Program's Afghanistan Subnational Government Program, managing a small grants program for Afghanistan civil society initiatives. Palwasha has also served as a program manager for the Gender Studies Institute at Kabul University and has experience working with the World Bank Group on Gender, Social Justice, and Environmental Issues. In 2004, Palwasha moved to Afghanistan to work with the Afghanistan Research and Evaluation Unit, which is an independent research organization on women's participation at the local levels in the National Solidarity Program. Prior to her move to Afghanistan, Palwasha was the director of the Newton Peace Center, currently the Peace Connections, which is a faith-based civil society organization. And Palwasha has published much research regarding women's participation in local governance, Pashtunwali Afghan customary law, Afghan women's identity, and social spaces in Afghanistan. Her research has taken her to many places, including Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Egypt, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and Syria. Palwasha holds a master's focusing on gender, politics, and religion from Harvard University's Divinity School and a bachelor's degree in religion and global studies focusing on peace and conflict from Bethel College in North Newton, Kansas. It's my pleasure to introduce you all to Palwasha, and I will hand the microphone over to her. Thank you, Palwasha.
Thank you, Kristen. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about this issue. I think this whole series is so important to create that space where we, as women with faith foundations, the work that we do, have a space to actually talk about this and have that that vocabulary to use, because oftentimes we keep it so internal because everything is so secular around us, we don't get a chance to really externalize or express our faith and what it means to us in the work that we do. So thank you so much for starting this series. And and for asking me to speak on this, because I think this is a really important issue and we need to create more spaces to talk about our faith and across religions, and how it affects the work that we do, in terms of our ethics, in terms of our principles, in terms of the resources that it provides for us that can help us overcome challenges. So thank you so much. So the topic today has been, Kristen noted, it takes a village, and the idea is, how do we foster support? Where do we find those resources in our faith community to help us, in particularly in times when we're traveling? And I'm sorry, the title was very long. I actually dropped it out of the front slide, but the long title was including when we actually travel. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of background in terms of who I am. As Kristen noted, I work at the U.S. Institute of Peace, which was founded in 1984 by a congressional decree, to work on peace issues abroad, to make peace possible abroad, but also to work on peace education here in the United States. I joined the United States Institute of Peace in 2014, and I work in what is now called the Religion and Inclusive Societies program. But oftentimes I get this question as, why do I do what I do? And so there's a story I like to tell about this that illustrates my background and also illustrates why religion is so central to the work that I do and why I think that religious frameworks are so important. My background is, I was born in Seattle, Washington. My father hails from northern Afghanistan, from Faryab province, and my mother comes from Iowa. And my mother's side of the family are Christian Mennonites, and my father's side of the family are Muslims from northern Afghanistan, Sunni Muslims. And so, being raised in Seattle, I had a very strong Muslim community that I was a part of, that my parents were both a part of there. But we were always raised with the expectation that we would go to Afghanistan, that my parents both were in the medical field and they wanted to move back to Afghanistan and actually do service, particularly in the health field, to the community. And so in 1989, when the Soviets pulled out of Afghanistan, my family decided to move back. But because of the civil war, the ongoing civil war inside of Afghanistan, we moved as far as we could, and that as far as we could was on the border in Peshawar, Pakistan. And in Peshawar, Pakistan, and I should also describe the pictures on the slide a little bit. So there's a picture of me with my classmates. I went to a Catholic school at that time before I moved, and I was in Seattle just before we moved to Pakistan, right on the border with Afghanistan. And in Pakistan, that's where there were refugee camps, and millions of Afghan refugees lived there. Among them was my father's extended family. So that's where I got to meet my uncles and aunts for the first time, and I got to meet my cousins. And it was there that I quickly realized that among all of my girl cousins, I was the only girl going to school. And of course, I wanted to do something about that. And I tried to talk to my uncles, now me being 11 years old at the time, and being the bold American that I was. I wanted to go and tell them how important it was for girls to get an education, how important it was for the community to have female doctors and female nurses and female teachers, and contributing to the economy, contributing to their family, being able to improve both the community and their families. Now, none of this worked. Not prestige, not the concept of economic benefits, none of that worked. It wasn't until I started talking about the religious framework and started talking about moral obligation to educate women, and how in the Quran and in the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, that there was explicit reference to the importance of educating girls. And it was with that I started to see that there was a little bit of opening, and I worked with my parents on this issue, and I asked them also to advocate. And so with my parents' help, we were able to advocate for my cousins to go to school, my girl cousins to go to school. So I'm happy to say now that we do have doctors and we do have teachers and we do have nurses among them, and that all their daughters go to school. But that at a very early age was an indicator for me to help me realize the importance of religious frameworks and opening up spaces for empowering women in conservative societies. And it's not just, I think that it's important for it to be indigenous, it's important for it to be local, but it's also very important to have that moral obligation, that moral imperative to be part of the story. So religion plays a really important factor in this. So I was living in Pakistan, and I went to school there until I completed my O-levels, and after that I came to the United States for higher education, as Kristen noted. When I was doing my master's degree, I started my master's degree, and 9/11 happened during that time. And so originally I'd wanted to study the women in the early Muslim community and the potential that they create for women's rights today. But because of all the strong rhetoric in the United States about how we have to go to save the Afghan women, and how barbaric the Taliban are, and this whole concept of having people coming from the outside trying to convince Afghans to empower women really motivated me to change the direction I was going with my master's degree. And so I focused then on the intersection of gender, religion, and politics. And so I finished my master's degree at Harvard Divinity School, and I went to Afghanistan right as soon as I finished. And I really wanted to work in this area, and I was finally able to, through a series of different positions, work in this area of really engaging with religious leaders, not just scholars, but also leaders on women's rights issues in Afghanistan, and what we call the gatekeepers. It was really working with those who were at the decision-making level to help them understand women's rights from an Islamic framework, and also create that empowering space for women to advocate for their rights, and for them to be granted their rights by the whole community. So it wasn't just women knowing what their rights are and advocating, but it was creating this whole space within the community for women to advocate. So I worked in Afghanistan during some very dangerous years, and in 2014 I joined USIP. And I'll get into the reasons why I left Afghanistan and joined USIP in a second, but this is a background to myself, and I'd like to get into the 4 points of faith resources that I want to present during this time. The first is the concept of nasiha. Now, nasiha means listening to sincere counsel, or giving sincere counsel. That's what nasiha is. Dua is prayers, because in Islam we have the 5 daily prayers. Dua is the reference to the supplication after the formal ritualistic prayers, or supplication during the formal prayers. But that is what dua is, and I did not say supplication because most everybody commonly calls supplication prayers. Third concept is tawakkul, or tawakkal ala Allah, which means relying on God or relying on the divine spirit, relinquishing that control and relying on the divine spirit. And the fourth concept that I wanted to talk about is interconnectedness, how we are all interconnected, but also internally how we're interconnected. Our hearts are connected to our mind and our physiological, our bodies. So there's so many different levels of connectedness internally and externally, as well as the coherence of the heart to make coherent all of these systems internally and then connecting to others externally. So those are the 4 faith resources that I've used and that I would like to talk about in this presentation. So first, I'll be talking about nasiha, and I'm really sorry. It seems like when this was converted, the middle of the slide got very light. So the first concept, and I'll read it, is nasiha, as I mentioned, and that is listening to sincere counsel. So I wanted to start with a story actually of how I joined the U.S. Institute of Peace. Um, when I was working in Afghanistan, after working there for um, almost 10 years, there started to be quite a lot of signs of deterioration, both of my mental health and also for my children. It was very difficult. It's a very difficult situation to live in. People who are living there are going through very deep struggles because every day they don't know whether they're going to come back alive. And that has very deep psychological impact and trauma, people working in that situation, living and working in that situation. And so it started to have an impact on my health, my well being, and also on my children's health. And so for a while, I had my children working, studying in the United States while I was going back and forth. And it was at this time that I had people in my faith community, my colleagues come to me and tell me, well, you're not able to function very well because of your health, and your kids are suffering even when you're away. They're not able to fully function because they're worried about you. And so it really, I found the work in Afghanistan very fulfilling. And I know it was fulfilling in many ways because I was seeing impact and I knew that I was making a difference. And I didn't know if anybody else would be able to carry this mantle, if I came to the United States, if I would be able to do anything as impactful as what I was doing. But it took a lot to let go and listen and really listen carefully to those who were around me and who were giving me very sincere counsel, who were saying, look, your son, when you're not home, he's sitting in a corner, he's not interacting with everybody, he's worried about you not coming home. And he was 3 years old at the time. And then also myself having a number of health problems where I had to have surgeries done because of these health problems. And a lot of it was related to stress that was causing all kinds of stresses on my body. So for that reason, I took their advice and I applied to jobs in the United States, and I was lucky to find this job to work with the U.S. Institute of Peace, very much in my field, and continue to work both in Afghanistan and other countries. But what I wanted to talk about is this concept because it's very difficult to sometimes open yourself up and listen to counsel that other people are giving you. I was asked this question last week by some students in Boston. How do you know when it's time to rest? A lot of times when we're working in this field and it's so fulfilling and we have so much to get done, we don't think about ourselves. We're thinking about the cause, we're thinking about the impact, we're thinking about our goals, and we don't really think about ourselves. And I've seen a lot of people, I've done to myself, where I push, 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 and I end up in the hospital because I wasn't taking care of myself and I got really severe flu because I wasn't paying attention, or other kinds of infections. So how do you know when it's time to rest? And what I found has been a really important resource to me is to listen to the community around me telling me that I look like I need rest. And it's really important to have those people who you can trust around you, and particularly those who are there to give you sincere counsel. So I'll tell you another story. My cousin, who I met when I went to Pakistan, she's the same age as me and became a very close friend of mine. In fact, I would say she's probably one of my best friends. She told me at one point some things that were difficult for me to hear. And this was when I was young, when I was 12, 13 years old. I think it was something to do with um, how I was interacting with other people and I wasn't using enough reverence and I should be more respectful. And of course, there were cultural issues, me coming from the United States, not understanding all of the formalities of respect needed. But I took it very negatively. I was like, why are you criticizing me for this? And she told me, she said, look, if I were not your friend, if I was not somebody who was really worried about you and about your reputation, I would not say these things to you. I would just say, oh, you're doing a great job. But it's because you're so close to me and because I care so much about you that I'm telling you these things. And I know that seems like very simplistic, but that's something that really stuck with me. It's our friends that really tell us the hard things, the things that we don't want to hear, that are hard for us to hear. But we really need to listen to that. In Islam, the concept of nasiha is to give sincere advice, um, but also it's important to take that sincere advice. And so it has to do with sincerity and intention. It has to do with somebody trying to get rid of defects, or to do justice to a person or to a situation. So it really comes from a place of somebody wanting to do good by you, to be sincere, to show sincere concerns. Um, there's a tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, that says religion is nasiha. Now, how is that? The companion said, what does this mean? To whom are you talking about that nasiha is needed? And he said, it's to Allah, it's to His books, and that is to be sincere in your intention, to Allah, to His book, the Quran, to His messenger, and to the leaders of your community. That is, you give sincere counsel to when they're doing something that you think contradicts or principles or what's wrong. You should give them sincere counsel, and also to your community members. So it's really important, both giving and receiving this concept of sincere counsel is really important in the concept of what makes religion in Islam, as the Prophet described. So another scholar explained, that his name was Imam Muhasabi, explained that um, it's know that he who advises you is the one that loves you, and he who flatters you is the one that deceives you. And the one that does not accept your advice is one that's not your family. Um, so it's really important to receive advice and to understand that it comes from a good place, the sincere advice from your faith community. Giving advice on what's good is important. Finding ways to protect from harm is also, it's explained further. And then also to enjoin what is good works. And this reminds me of Surah Al-Asr in the Quran, which reads, and I'm doing the translation here, in the name of God, the one who is loving beyond expectation, and the one who is compassionate, everlasting. By the passing of time, indeed all humans are in a state of loss, except for those who believe in God and do good works, and who urge one another towards truth and justice, and who urge one another towards patient perseverance and tolerance. So this advice giving is really important, both to concept and resource, both to give and to receive. And it's really important when I'm in situations traveling, when I'm in situations abroad, when I'm in situations even under stress in the work that I do, to have those people who can give me that sincere advice and counsel. That nasiha is so important. The next concept I wanted to get to is dua, and that is asking for prayers. Dua is also a really important concept in Islam. And there's been a lot of discussion in this series about prayer and how important prayer is. I just wanted to touch upon a few things. One is that I think all faiths say that it's important to ask, to pray to God, to ask for things from God when you're facing difficulty. Surah Al-Mu'min in the Quran says, and your Lord says, call upon me and I will answer you. It's really important to ask. That keeps getting emphasized a lot, both in the Quran and in the tradition of the Prophet, how important it is to ask, both when and be grateful and thankful, both when you're in a situation of wealth, of well-being, of success, to be thankful, to make prayers to thank, and then also to make dua when you need help and support. Um, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, also said that dua is a form of worship. So it's not just that you're asking for selfish reasons, but it is a form of worship and prayerful worship. Uh, in every prayer, formally, we say, "You alone do we ask for help." We say to God, and this is from part of Surah Fatiha. "You alone do we ask for help." You alone do we worship, and you alone do we ask for help. It's a really important concept of worship and seeking help. So how is this a resource for me? It's a resource for me. There are three states of people that actually, when they make dua, it's considered elevated, or it's asking on somebody's behalf. Rather than asking for yourself, having somebody ask on your behalf is also an important concept. And so asking for du'as, although it's hard and difficult, can also be very meaningful and also give you that confidence that somebody's there thinking about you and somebody's praying for you and giving you that positive support that you need in the work that you're doing. The dua of the parent is really important, and that is mothers and fathers. Their dua is very important. The dua of the traveler, so somebody traveling, and oftentimes when I travel, people ask me to make duas for them while I'm traveling, and the dua of the oppressed. So I want to tell you a quick story about visualizing, and it's a story that my mother told me growing up, and it was really important for me in terms of understanding the power of prayer and dua. It's a story, and it's a true story, of a mother who repeatedly would have a dream. Her son was a pilot, and she would repeatedly have a dream of her son crashing his plane right in front of her. She was sitting outside in a park, and his plane would crash land, and he would die right in front of her. And every time she had this dream, she would pray and re-visualize in her prayer her son landing safely in front of her and coming out unscathed. And this happened over and over again. And the day came when this actually came true, when she was sitting in a park and her son happened to be flying overhead and had engine trouble, and the plane came down and crashed in front of her. But he came out alive and unscathed, just as she had revisioned it in her prayers. So that story for me was really influential as I was growing up, and talking about the power of prayer and revisualizing in prayer that can actually have an impact on events in your life. I often travel to dangerous places, and I do ask for people to pray for me when I travel, and it does help give me that sense of well-being and trust and confidence. It's been really important for me, particularly to ask those in my faith community and my parents to make dua. And I want to tell you a story about Libya. I went to Libya once. Unfortunately, it became too dangerous for me to go after 2014, the one time that I did go. But in 2014, I went, and the first night I was there, I heard gunshot fires around me. And I knew that there was a lot of disquiet, and there could be possible attacks on the horizon, because already Benghazi and the airport had been attacked, and there was fighting coming in towards Tripoli where I was. But we were hoping it was, a month, 2 months down the line, it wasn't going to come so soon. But when I did hear the firing behind me, I immediately, started praying, making dua, that it wasn't anything serious. And I started visualizing, now what are all the possible positive ways that this firing could be happening, instead of the negative, instead of focusing on, well, somebody's getting killed or somebody's attacking another person or something like that is happening around where I was staying. And the one thing that came to my mind was how in Afghanistan, when there are weddings, they do fire gunshots up in the air for joy, or if some joyful event happens, this happens. And I know that they do this in some Arab countries, particularly in rural places in some Arab countries in North Africa. So I was thinking, well, maybe if I could think about this positively and revisualize, it would be that they were doing this for joy, that maybe there's some wedding or something going on. So the next day I asked um, about it, and I was told that yes, indeed, there was a wedding party behind the hotel, and it was because of a wedding. Although that day there was, the same day that I asked about it in the morning, there was an attack on Parliament, and so I was quickly evacuated. But luckily, I was not in that region where there was direct fighting, that the gunshots I had heard were actually for joy. So I think the power of revisualizing is really important, both in um, finding comfort for your own situation and in asking others to pray for you and having that support of your community behind you and that positive thoughts and positive prayers and that revisualizing positively coming from the community. Um, Another piece that I also wanted to add to this is the importance of gratefulness. And I mentioned it a little bit before how it's important not only to ask in time of need, but also to be grateful and to be thankful and to make dua in gratefulness. But gratefulness has another aspect to it. Gratefulness in prayer can also flip the situation. So when you're feeling very helpless and you're feeling in a state of need and you're asking for supplication, having those moments where you're grateful and you focus on gratefulness can also flip your mental state about the situation and somehow can open doors and open visualization that can be positive in finding ways out and finding solutions to the issue that you're dealing with. So that's another aspect of prayer that has been important for me. The next concept is tawakkul, or tawakkal ala Allah, and that is reliance on the Divine Spirit. Coming from a place in Afghanistan or working in conflict zones like Afghanistan, where any day you don't know whether you're going to be close to a bomb blast or whether you're going to be caught in the crossfire or whether you're going to be targeted. It's really important to find that space of to be able to work on what you're in control of and to be able to let go and say, this is not in my control anymore, this is in God's control. And so I want to tell you a quick story that for me was really instrumental in helping me overcome my fears when I was living in a conflict zone or traveling to dangerous areas. And that is the story of an Afghan refugee. He was in one of those families that was with the government and had been targeted by the Taliban. And so his family decided to send him to the UK for studies so that he was out of the situation in Afghanistan. And he went to the UK and was studying there. And while he was there, he got caught in there was some sort of a mugging that was happening, and he got caught in it, and he was stabbed and killed in this mugging. And his body was then sent back to Afghanistan while he was there. His family lamented, saying, "Look, we sent him away from all these attacks, all these suicide bombings that could have happened, all the targeting that could have happened to your family. We sent him far away from this, and yet still he met his end." And to a lot of people, it meant that no matter where we are, when it's our time, we're going to go. When it's not our time, we're not going to go. So even if we're in the wrong place, even if something happens to us, I've seen so many people walk out of a situation where it didn't seem like they would walk out alive. So to me, that reinforced that reliance on God, that things are in there's certain things that are in God's control, there's certain things in our control. We try our best to keep safe, we try our best to do whatever we can, but there are certain things that are in God's control beyond what we can control. Another example is a story of a friend who worked with me at Kabul University, and she went to the Ministry of Interior to work out some of her documentation. And literally in front of her, she saw a scuffle between somebody who looked like a suicide bomber and some of the security guards. And she was standing in a long line of people to try and get into the ministry who had to go through security checks. And literally, when she saw that, she just ran right into the security booth and went in, pushed herself in as far as she could into the Ministry of Interior. And the bomb blast happened. She, because of shattering of window and glass and because of the loud noise, she did have some injuries, but she walked away with her life, whereas other people who had been in line with her did not. Another example, that helped me understand this was there was a person who was close to my father who had worked with my father as an advisor in the government. He was attacked, he was shot, but he walked away with his life. Um, so those are the kinds of stories to me that really put into focus how even when we're in situations that we think we may not come out alive, or even in a situation where we think we're totally safe, everything is in the hands of Allah and we don't have control over those things. So tawakkul ala Allah is really doing your best, but then relying on God or trusting in God's plan for the parts that you can't control. And that's been really important to me in the work that I do in going to danger zones where I work. There's a verse in the Quran from Ali Imran that says, and when you've decided on something, so you make your decision, you decide on what you're going to do, then you rely on Allah. And there's a famous saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, that says, tie your camel and then rely upon Allah. So it's not that you just leave up everything to God's will and you don't try yourself to do your best, but that you try your best and then you rely on Allah. You do what you can, what's in your control, and then you rely on Allah. But this reliance beyond being a comfort and working in difficult places has also been a refocusing tool for me. So when I hit a wall, I can't write, or I'm having trouble with the work that I'm doing, I don't see a solution out, I'm trying my best, but I can't reach a conclusion, I can't reach my goal. What I do is refocus, and it really helps me to just let go and say, okay, why am I doing this? How am I doing this that's based on my faith and my principles? And try and let go of my ego, let go of my career, what it means for my career, what it means for where I'm at, and just refocus that in terms of my faith and my principles and what parts of it are important to me, depending on my faith. So as I work on women's rights within an Islamic perspective, for me, that was really important to say, this is our moral obligation. This is what Allah demands of us, to work for the betterment of others, to serve others, to also ensure that the rights of others are met. And so by doing that, by refocusing that and then relying on God and saying, okay, it is the divine spirit, it is God, it's Allah that's moving me through this. And Allah will make happen what's happened. I'm trying my best. And then letting go, that has really opened up things for me, and I've been able to move past a lot of challenges by doing that. So for me, tawakkul is a really important part of overcoming challenges in the work that I do, both in conflict situations, but also in resolving problems within my work. It helps me refocus, and it helps me let go of where my ego's at, and also of the control that I think I might have on a situation, and trusting in Allah. So that's the concept of tawakkul. The next concept I want to talk about is interconnectedness and heart coherence. Now this is a little bit more difficult to speak about, and I do urge people who are interested in this to to look at the Heart Math Institute online. They're doing some really great work. They've come up with ways to measure heart coherence. But let me take a step back. Okay, so what do we mean? What do I mean by heart and coherence? So this personal coherence, this concept, is actually something that can be measured. It's something that's measured based on our heart rhythm patterns, and it refers to the synchronization of our physical, our mental, and emotional systems. So internally, you can see online. There's ways to do this. My parents actually are really big believers, and they're the ones that have influenced me. They have you. It's biofeedback. You can actually measure yourself, your heart rates, and see how when you're frustrated, um, when you're under stress, your heart rhythms are different than when you're able to calm down and de-stress. And there are ways of doing that. One is to improve your breathing, and the other is gratefulness, is to actually hold a grateful thought your um, in your mind as you breathe, and that actually helps form this coherence and to de-stress. And this has been really important for me to find ways when I get very stressed out, find myself in a difficult situation, worried, or um, in a place where I feel like I don't have control, and I'm doing this tawakkal. I'm feeling grateful with, doing my gratefulness prayers, and then also working on this breathing aspect to help build this coherence internally of the mental, physical, and emotional systems within my body. The interesting thing about this is the next step, and that is that this kind of heart coherence, once we find it internally, can affect other people around us. So it can affect others in the room around us who are within that sphere where they can perceive our heart coherence. And there's been studies done to show this. So again, I would refer you to the Heart Math Institute to see the studies. But that gets to a concept in Islam about how important the heart is, and it's been really important to me. So two things. One is that in Islam, the idea of joining hearts together it comes up a bit, and also that Allah is the one who can open your hearts, and when you open your hearts, you're open to the truth, and locked hearts are not open to the truth. So there's a lot of issues. There's a lot of verses in the Quran that talk about the heart and opening of the heart and perceiving through the heart. One that particularly speaks to me on this issue of how our hearts are interconnected and how we actually can affect each other positively by having heart coherence ourselves and affecting those around us is the verse from Ali Imran, 103rd verse, that says, and hold firmly to the rope of Allah. So that intertwinedness of how we're all part of this rope. So we hold firmly to this rope of Allah together, and not to become divided. And that in remembering the favor, again, it gets to that gratefulness, remembering the favor of Allah upon you. So being grateful of the favor of Allah upon you. At the time when you were enemies, Allah had joined your hearts together, and you became like one family by Allah's favor. So it's that interconnectedness, it's that gratefulness, it's becoming one by having our hearts opened and joined, that we're able to overcome difficulties together as a group. And there's a very famous prayer, a dua, a supplication of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, saying, "O turner of hearts, strengthen my heart with your truth." And that has been really important for me to find that strength and having that heart coherence. I wanted to tell a story of something that happened actually to me last week that really opened my eyes to how connected we are and how we can actually influence each other. So I was in Boston, and a number of us women peace builders were lining up to go out to the stage to give a presentation. And this was at the Kennedy School Forum last week. And my friend from Syria was she was going to tell some very emotional stories, and she was getting very emotional and very distraught about it. And um, our friend from Colombia, who was also going to be presenting, she literally embraced her and just held her tight and breathed with her up and down. And by breathing with her, and then I also joined, there were a number of us that joined in this embrace, where we were all together, we were breathing with each other, and that breathing together really helped us. We felt each other breathing together, being together, supporting each other, praying together, and then being able to go out. And that really calmed us all down and brought the level of anxiety and stress down. So I think I mean, I've had that experience, and I think we are connected in so many ways, and there's lots of studies that have shown how well we are connected. But I found that as very helpful. So even when I'm not in a state of coherence, there are other people who can help me in the community get to that level, de-stress, help my heart, my mind, my physical, mental, and emotional systems all synchronize and come back to this state of coherence and interconnectedness. Um, so that is the fourth concept. So just to review the four concepts that I just discussed. The first was nasiha, that is listening to sincere counsel and opening yourself to be able to listen and receive that sincere counsel. The second is dua, and that is not just giving prayers or supplicating, but it's also receiving. So it's on both ends. It's learning how to be grateful. And then the third is tawakkal, and that is relying on the divine spirit. And the fourth is that interconnectedness and heart coherence. How we affect each other and how we can bring our systems into harmony within our own body. So those are the four concepts. One thing, Kristen, you mentioned about resilience, and I was just thinking about that because resilience is really important, and these all build resilience in the work that we do. USIP has done a study on why some communities are more resilient than others to violent extremism, and one of the things that came up that was really interesting to me was how important the relationship between the youth and the elders are. Those communal relationships, that support network within the community, how important having both generations be part of that support network is so important to resilience in a community. And going back to just reflecting a lot of these, both listening to sincere counsel emphasizes the importance of that relationship, asking for dua. It's not just of peers, but it's also of our elders, and the interconnectedness that we have. So resilience within the community is really important, as well as building our own resilience. And our faith really gives us a lot of these resources to understand the frameworks and to build that support and those resources that we need for building resilience in the work that we do. So I will end here and open it up to questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Palwasha. One of the things that you mentioned that really struck me powerfully was the phrase, the one that does not receive advice is not your family. And I've never heard that before. But I think in terms of resiliency and vulnerability, kind of two major words that are kind of buzzwords in our society right now, but I think are very necessary and needed. Oftentimes those aren't really encultured in our communities. This idea of really receiving advice and having that be a part of a family environment. How do you maybe foster that kind of a culture in a community or a family where that is not something that's been valued in the past?
Um, that's a good question. I think that respect is a really key component. Um, and I'm thinking in context where, like Afghanistan, like Libya, where the youth are so disconnected. So the elders are not, they don't know how to use technology. They're not familiar with the buzzwords. Um, so they're seen as something sort of the past, although there is very strong institutions of respect within the culture, oftentimes we're seeing that these youth are splitting and forming these violent extremist groups, and they're not um, respectful of their elders, and they're not listening. Um, so how do you build that respect? And I think it's modeling, it's doing it yourself, and showing that respect. It's it's discussing it and creating that space for mutual respect. So it's not just that the youth have to respect their elders, but it's the elders have to respect the youth as well. Um, and I think with sincere counsel, it's not that you just have to do whatever somebody tells you to do, but it's engaging with them respectfully by saying, okay, you're advising me to do this. So how would this work out? If I did this, this, and this, and this might happen. What do you think? And sort of having that conversation where somebody sincerely worried about your future will help you to walk through all of these scenarios and listen to the concerns. And there's also another component to this, and that is istikhara, which is having prayers at night before you go to bed, and praying for guidance from Allah to help you, give you a clear sense of direction. And so even as you're making decisions and somebody may give you advice, you can also say, well, I'm doing istikhara about this, in a respectful way. So it's not that you're just negatively saying no, flat out no, but you're considering your options and you're considering what people are providing for you in terms of advice.
Yeah, that's a wonderful answer. Thank you. Um, I did have another question, kind of along the same lines. You mentioned in the very beginning you were talking about how do you know when to rest, and that was just really helpful information to kind of know that some of your best indicators are your community that's surrounding you. Um, I'm curious about what are some of the greatest kind of struggles that you face professionally that um, maybe are indicators of not being encouraged to rest. So how do you kind of identify those cultural pressures, and maybe also use that as a way to turn towards your community and turn towards that rest? I'm not sure if that question made sense or not.
No, it does make sense. Professionally, so in Afghanistan, most foreign foreigners who were working there did not have their family there. So they were working all hours, day and night, weekends. Work was always work, email, respond to this, respond. Even though we weren't going into work, there was always this expectation to work, 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 and respond to work. Um, so there was this pressure, and I think that there, in places where there are families where it's like a family duty station, it's not as much because there is the expectation that people would be spending time with their families, and on the weekend as well. But in Afghanistan, particularly, that wasn't the case. There was a very high expectation that people would be working constantly. So it did take, and coming straight out from school, seeing that expectation, I just went with it. It took me a while later on, once I had children and I was with my family, that I realized that I needed to take time out for them. I needed to be able to say no. And it was my family and my community around me that said, "Hey, you're not paying attention to this. You're not doing this. You need to take some time for self-care." And it was good that I did have some friends who were really good at self-care and who talked about the importance of doing it. And so it was really important to spend that time alone by myself, to be able to have time to reflect, to go, whatever it meant. It meant just getting a massage or, going out with somebody, one of my friends, to have lunch together someplace different. Having that space apart from work was really important, and that self-care. And I continue to have wonderful people in my community who do tell me, and just today I had another friend say, hey, it's time we need to take some time off and do some self-care. Um, So it's really great to have that. And for me, my body changes. Everybody, we all change over time. So knowing the indicators it's very difficult, because what I could push myself with when I was 20 something is different than what I can push my body to when I'm 30 something. So understanding those limits it's more difficult, I think, for myself to know when I can push and when I can't push. But with my friends around me, it really helps, and it helps me in my community for people to say, you can take time for yourself, you can do this for yourself. And I think that also comes from not feeling justified, like we have to be working all the time, and feeling that guilt when we're not. But by having that community of support to say you need the rest to be able to work, to be able to do your work effectively, by having that community to say you need to take self-care, and to not only advocate but actually do it with you, that really helps. I think that really helps overcome that guilt, and that difficulty from being able to separate work, and spend some time alone.
Mm. Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you. I see that Naseem has a question down in the chat box. Thank you, Palwasha, for sharing. You talked a bit about this in the presentation, but how can you give a nasiha or receive one with humility?
Sorry. Nasiha has a lot of criteria in Islam. You don't give it publicly. You give it privately. You give advice with humility. You don't make demands on another person. There's so many. There's like five criteria that are standard. I mean, of course, there are probably scholars who've gone more into detail on this. But humility is a really important piece to giving nasiha. It is somebody who says, well, this is my perspective. This is how I know. I'm not saying I know everything, but from my point of view, this is what looks like it would be best for you to do, or this is what I would advise. This might be better for you versus this. Um, Humility is a really important component of it, and it also makes it easier on the receiving end if somebody's coming to you with a suggestion and doing it humbly, and doing it in a way saying, this is where I'm coming from, this is how I understand it, and this is the position that I have based on my understanding, and I may not know everything, but this is where I'm coming from. So humility is a really important aspect to it, and that's why receiving advice, when it's done right, when you're giving the nasiha in the right way, it opens it up more to a conversation, and it opens up a conversation of somebody who may have some ideas that would be helpful, but may also take you down a road that would be helpful, not directly but more indirectly helpful further down the lane. So humility is a very important aspect of nasiha, definitely. Are there other questions?
I think that might. Oh, looks like Naseem is typing a response. Thank you again. Wonderful. Good. Well, I'm just going to bring myself back up on camera here as we kind of close out. We're just over the 2 o'clock hour. And just wanted to heartily thank you, Palwasha, for presenting your wisdom on this topic today. I certainly heard some things that challenged me in the ways that I interact and draw support and provide support to the members of my faith community. So thank you so much for not just sharing those points of wisdom, but also the stories behind them. That was really powerful today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kristen, for starting this series and for providing the space for us to really speak about our faith more directly. I really appreciate it, and I'm glad that these will be up online, and that the conversation can continue, and it can continue to create this space where we can talk openly about how important our faith and our faith resources are for us when we're facing challenges.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's the whole point of the series, and I'm glad and thankful for all the people like yourself who have presented in it, and am anxious for the future people who will watch these sessions. So with that, met, I wanted to just post in the chat box below the web link. As Palwasha mentioned, we're posting all of the recordings of the videos in this series on the YouTube channel listed below. So you can go online, and if you missed this session or any of the prior sessions in the series, you can go and rewatch them and glean some of that wisdom for yourself. So with that, we are at a close. Thank you, Palwasha, so much, and I hope you and all of our viewers have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.